What is up, ladies and gentlemen? I know it's been a couple days and we're coming back with quite a unique video for the channel here. Um kind of went camping and lived life a little bit. So I'm sorry I've been gone for a couple days, but nonetheless, man, we're back. And I'm coming up with a new thing here, man. As you guys know, this is a pro wrestling page, but recently WWE and UFC have become interconnected through the ownership of TKO. TKO owns both WWE and UFC. Therefore, I thought I'd make things interesting and begin to cover UFC. Um, Normally, I wouldn't watch a UFC fight night. UFC fight night is like it's on like once every week or two, and it's basically their how do I explain this? It's their recurring television. You could watch every UFC fight night with a subscription to ESPN Plus. You're not going to see any championship fights, but you will see at least one ranked fight where a ranked fighter will fight another ranked fighter. But nonetheless, quick story here. I get back from my camping trip on Saturday. I take a little nap and I wake up to my friend's text message. He says, "Hey man, I have 2 free tickets to UFC in Denver. I live in Colorado. Do you wanna come with me?" This is the first time that UFC has been in the state of Colorado in over 5 years, I believe. I said, "Yes, I would love to come with you. I've never been to a UFC fight before." Ladies and gentlemen, think about your first time going to a wrestling match, like a Monday Night Raw or a Friday Night SmackDown, your first time going to a baseball game, your first time going to a basketball game. It's a spectacle. It is just a new thing that you've never seen live before. And I've been a fan of UFC all my life alongside pro wrestling. I grew up watching pro wrestling. I also grew up going to the family barbecue and watching guys like Brock Lesnar, guys like Frank Mir, guys like Diego Nightmare Sanchez, guys like Cain Velasquez. I've grown up with UFC, maybe not as much as WWE, but I've always been around it. So to finally walk into that arena and see that octagon and get into it and just be with Denver, Colorado, witnessing their first UFC event in over 5 years was truly a magical time. And nonetheless, like I said, I usually only watch the UFC pay per views, the numbered pay per views, which come out like once or twice a month, maybe just like WWE, just like pro wrestling rolls them out, UFC does like a once a month big event. And if you wanted to start watching UFC, I'd recommend that. I'd recommend watching the pay-per-views about once a month. Get some friends together. I'm sure you have a friend that watches UFC that would be happy to split the pay-per-view with you and have some beers or whatever your preference is and enjoy the show. Nonetheless, guys, I got to see a UFC fight night in Denver live, and that's why we're covering this here. My my philosophy with these summary and analysis videos is if I watch the show, I'm going to review it. So if I didn't review it, it's because I didn't watch the show. But if I did review it, like this right now, it's because I watched the show and I'm going to tell you what I think. And that's going to pertain to all the pro wrestling that I mentioned that I'm going to cover in here in previous videos and what have you. And then I think I'm going to expand outside of pro wrestling to two things that number one are loosely connected to TKO, owned by WWE, and also are worth checking out if you wanted to expand your horizons beyond pro wrestling. There's two things that I would recommend for you. The first one is UFC because I think MMA right now is just awesome. It may look similar to pro wrestling, but they're two different things completely, and I enjoy them in two different ways. And yeah, I recommend checking out UFC. And if you're not familiar, then like I said, start with the numbered pay-per-views. UFC 304 is actually coming up here shortly. I believe it's next weekend, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm very excited for that. I'll probably put a review up of UFC 304. And then maybe in that UFC review, I'll tell you when 305 is just to help you out a little bit and give you something to aim to watch. Um, Nonetheless, man, that's the first thing outside of pro wrestling that I'm going to kind of cover here on this page, on this channel is UFC. And then the next one isn't directly tied to WWE and TKO. It's the UFL, the United Football League. Of course, Dwayne Johnson is co-owner of the United Football League. They just had their first season. It's a spring professional football league. And while TKO doesn't own this entity, Dwayne Johnson, the co-owner, is um, on the TKO board of directors. And the UFL is what is it's a descendant of the XFL, which was started by Vince McMahon, the then owner of WWE, the then chairman of WWE. So in my mind, in my opinion, like I think the UFL does have, while unofficial, nonetheless ties to WWE. And I think if you wanted to check something else out besides pro wrestling, I think the United Football League would be worth your time. It's less superstar based football and it's a little more team based professional football. The games are really close most of the time, and we're not going to have to worry about that because I think the UFL football season starts next year in like March or April. So we have about like 9 whole months before we do anything UFL related on this channel. I just wanted to be transparent with you and pull the curtain back. While I do encourage you guys to expand your horizons in pro wrestling, I also encourage you to expand your horizons beyond pro wrestling and watch pro wrestling become a lot more enjoyable if you kind of check out other things. So, yeah, you're going to see me talk about UFC on this channel, and you're also going to see me talk about the United Football League when spring football season comes back around in 2025. All right, guys, let's get into this. Like I said, I got to be in attendance for this UFC fight night, and there were 6 fights on the main card. And then, of course, they do prelims, which are preliminary fights. So they'll do about 3 hours worth of preliminary fights before the main card even starts. And I got to enjoy about an hour or so of the preliminary fights before the main card started. My seats were fantastic. I was like 5 rows from the octagon. Shout out to my friend and the person that gave my friend these tickets. Very generous and very generous of my friend to invite me to watch UFC with him live. So, like I said, guys, in these preliminary fights, we were about 5 rows up from the octagon. And in our corner of the octagon, a knockout took place. And the energy of that knockout was fantastic. It was unlike anything. Think about if you ever went to an NFL game, like seeing the first touchdown go down, and everybody cheers and it's rowdy. This was a similar feeling. It wasn't the exact same sound or vibe, but it was its own unique thing, right? And it was 5 rows away from us. It was in our corner. Like I felt like I was right there watching it, just seeing somebody get knocked out and seeing the crowd go crazy was super awesome. That happened in the preliminary fights, and then the main card started. And I'm going to go down the main card loosely. So we started with 2 Colorado guys facing off against each other in the middleweight division. We had Cody Brundage taking on Abdul Razak Al Hassan. And excuse me, I don't want to butcher anybody's name. The UFC does a really good job of getting international fighters on these cards. And it's not just guys from the USA fighting. There are quite a few guys from the USA fighting most of the time. But I feel like the world of mixed martial arts is represented by UFC. So you're going to see a lot of ultimately names that are hard for me to pronounce, international fighters whenever you watch UFC. So I apologize if I butcher anyone's name here. Anyway, let's talk about this first fight, right? We start the main card. We get very excited. This is the first fight, theoretically, on the main card that Denver has seen in over 5 years. And basically, within 10 seconds, Cody Brundage is getting punched out. He's no longer on his feet within 10 to 15 seconds, and he's just taking these hits. And my thoughts were, if you've seen UFC before, you know there's referee stoppage involved when a fighter cannot defend themselves. Now that gets very subjective when you're watching as a fan. Ultimately, it's the referee's decision. There's one referee, and it's his decision to stop the fight if he thinks this fighter can't defend themselves. I know UFC referees in the past have gotten in trouble for not stopping the fight soon enough. In my opinion, I was there. I was pretty close to the octagon. It looked like this fight should have been stopped. This fight was over. I think the referee gave them the benefit of the doubt and wanted to let them fight. But nonetheless, this led to Abdul, who was beating up Cody Brundage pretty good, to elbow him in the back of the head, which is a no-no in MMA. So he elbows Cody Brundage in the back of the head. The referee stops the fight, and they began to do what appears to be a concussion protocol test on Cody Brundage, who a lot of people in the crowd, and I'm not going to give my opinion on this, but a lot of people in the crowd were saying he looked like he was faking it. And I'm going to explain why it made sense for Cody Brundage to fake this concussion or just act dazed and confused. Because if these doctors doing this test ultimately conclude that Cody Brundage is unable to fight, then the fight is a disqualification. Cody Brundage, within 5 to 10 seconds of this fight, was losing, was ready to lose, like off his feet, taking hits. This fight, in my opinion, was done. The referee should have stopped it. It should have been a win for Abdul, with it a 30-second win for Abdul. But instead, he lets them go on, and Abdul goes on to use his elbow and elbow the back of Cody Brundage's head. And this leads to a disqualification, unfortunately. So what could have been, I mean, I'm talking from a viewer standpoint, from the standpoint of a fan in the crowd. I know that the safety of the fighters is paramount. So my words here are not a reflection of that philosophy. But from the perspective of a fan, what should have been a less than 30-second technical knockout, right, ends up being a disqualification and really just kind of sucks the air out of the arena. This arena was loud and ready to watch some fights, and this fight stopping the way it did really turned the fans off. I'm not gonna lie. They still had a good time and they still cheered and hollered, but it kind of sucked the air out of the arena, and you could feel that after this first fight. And Abdul was pissed, and I don't blame him. When Cody Brundage was walking out of the arena, he actually got booed very heavily. And that's because a lot of people think that he was acting, he was faking, being more dazed and confused and hurt than he was, because he knew if the referees and the medical team called the fight, then he's not taking the loss here. It's going to go down as a disqualification. But we all know that he was basically getting his ass kicked and he was going to take that loss. So here's a hometown dude acting his way out of a loss, and it wasn't a good look for Cody Brundage. I'm not gonna lie, he got booed out of that arena. In my opinion, if I'm an MMA fighter, and I know I'm not an MMA fighter, but my philosophy as a man is, if I'm getting my ass kicked and it's my hometown, I'm gonna take my beating and give these guys a show. And I get that that's just an opinion, but it's your hometown, man. You don't want to go out like that in front of your hometown. You really don't. So anyway, this first fight had potential to be interesting, but nonetheless, it resulted in a disqualification, unfortunately. Let's move on to our next fight. Fight number 2 of 6. We had we had Julian Erosa versus Christian Rodriguez, two Americans against each other in the featherweight division. And this fight was good. It actually made it to the second round. And towards the end of the second round, we actually had Julian Erosa lock in a guillotine choke and get the win by submission, which happened rather quickly. Submissions in the UFC aren't the slowest thing, but they are a bit drawn out sometimes, right? You got a guy fighting to not let the submission get locked in. You got another guy slowly and meticulously working the submission until he locks it in. This happened within about like 10 seconds, guys. They were doing some ground game stuff, right? And then before you knew it, that guillotine chokehold was locked in, and then went ahead and got Erosa the submission win. it was very cool, right? Very cool to see a submission win. It's not as interesting or fun as a knockout, but nonetheless, I'm a fan of the sport. I'm a fan of the culture, so it was cool to see a guillotine choke for the win. So this fight went about 2 rounds. This happened before the second round ended. And it's always interesting, right? When there's like 20 seconds left in a round and the fight ends all quickly because you kind of tune out, right? You're like, okay, they're going to go to the next round. Oh no, the fight's over. Wow. Okay. So that happened in the second fight. And then we go to our third fight, guys, which is in the welterweight division. Gabriel Bonfim versus Angelusa. Like I said, a lot of international names, and I'm really doing my best here to give these fighters credit and say their names properly so they don't kick my ass. Um, we actually had Bonfim get the decision victory. So this fight went the distance, and it was pretty clear that Bonfim got the win. But nonetheless, man, these guys went the distance, and finally, the winner came down to the decision of the judges, which is what happens when the 3 rounds are up. So this was a fight that went the distance. There was a couple good hits in here, a couple violent hits in here, which was cool. Solid. What happened next in this lightweight division in the fourth fight of the evening was Gene Silva took on Drew Dober. And Drew Dober was from Denver, Colorado. He was a hometown guy. So he comes in, he's very hype, he's very excited. The fans are popping for this Drew Dober dude, because he's from Denver, Colorado. So he's getting a huge reaction. This is the fight, in my opinion, that actually brought the energy back after the first fight kind of sucked the energy out of the building just because of that disqualification finish. The fans did not like that at all. I did not like that at all. Nonetheless, man, Drew Dober comes in against Gene Silva, who's a tough guy. He actually took this fight on a 14 days notice. Usually these fighters have at least a month or months even to prepare for their fight. This guy took 14 days, said, yes, I will fight in 14 days, and he's there to fight. And he gave Drew Dober a beating. Oh my goodness, he gave him a beating. I'm not going to lie. Um, it was so at the end of the second round, I believe the clock is ticking down again within the last 20 seconds. We actually see Silva land an elbow, a nasty elbow. Drew Dober, hometown guys, I was completely disgusting. If I'm being honest, man, that just comes with the territory with MMA. This thing was gushing blood, and he took several hits to the eye to finish the second round. And then he tried fight. They went into the third round. They let the guys go into the third and final round. And this guy's eye, Drew Dober's eye, was just gushing blood a little too much. So they called the fight and they gave the win to Gene Silva. Kind of a unique finish to this fight here. Usually, if a dude gets socked out and he can't defend himself, they're going to call the fight right then and there. But no, this happened so close to the end of round two that they didn't call the fight. The fighters went to their corners, and then they came back to finish out the last round. And within 20 seconds of the last round, they were like, no, this guy can't fight anymore. Winner goes to Gene Silva. So nonetheless, the hometown boy did not get the win here, but he did look good in defeat. He fought like a man. He took some serious hits here. Like he was clearly not going to win this fight, and he was getting hit pretty hard in the face to the point where they couldn't close up his wound by his eye, and he was just gushing a ton of blood. It was really disgusting, to be honest, but that's the cool thing about MMA. But he was a valiant effort by Drew Dober, even though he didn't win in front of the hometown crowd, and he was able to, he really showed that warrior spirit, especially getting on the microphone in an interview after the fight and saying, shout out to Gene Silva. I respect him as a fighter. He defeated me. He took this fight on 14 days notice, and I would do the same. I'm here to fight. This is fighter culture. And Drew Dober, even in defeat, just looks really good in front of this Denver crowd. Brought the energy back in the arena for sure. And this led us right into the last two fights of the night. And the co-main event was a welterweight fight between Santiago Ponzinibbio, I hope I said that correctly, and Muslim Salikov. We have a Russian versus an Argentinian representing the welterweight division as our co-main event. And the crowd kind of turned on this fight and I don't agree with the crowd in this situation. This was a very technical chess match of a fight, right? So they were brawling for the first 2 rounds were a lot of brawling on their feet. A couple punches landed. Like I said, it was very defensive heavy, and the punches and kicks that landed were few and far in between. And honestly, like that's not as exciting as maybe like a 30-second finish or a brutal fight where both guys are just really beating the hell out of each other, but I did like it. I did appreciate the fact that this was like a very technical, defense heavy, few and far in between connecting punches fight. Maybe the crowd booed them out of the arena a little bit, but I was not booing. I was enjoying it, right? I was just quietly watching, right? Kind of taking it all in, like what's going to happen next. There's not too much going on. These guys are playing good defense, having good defense against each other, but you never know with the UFC. So nonetheless, this actually goes to decision, and for me as a fan, it's hard to decipher who really won this fight. I'm talking to people around me. I'm talking to my friend. I'm like, "Hey, what do you think? Who won this fight?" He's like, "I don't know, man. I don't. It's hard to tell." In my opinion, it did seem like Santiago landed a couple more hits than Muslim did. Um, Nonetheless, man, Muslim Salikov gets the victory here in what I would call questionable fashion. But nonetheless, guys, that's how it happens. Sometimes the fight goes the distance. And if it was an even fight, it could really go either way. I do think Muslim Salikov did enough to win this fight, but I probably would have said that the other man won. Nonetheless, man, he gets the victory. It's a little questionable, but that's the culture. That just happens when fights go to distance sometimes. And like I said, it was a very what people would call a boring fight. I'm not gonna lie, but I enjoyed it. I really did enjoy that these guys just weren't beating the hell out of each other. These guys were doing good defense against each other. It made the fight interesting. It was a nice splash of something unique on this UFC fight card. Nonetheless, guys, that was the co-main event, and Muslim Salikov said he loves the city of Denver. He loves training in the altitude, and he's going to start running a lot more training camps here in the city of Denver. So it looks like Denver has an adopted son here in Muslim Salikov. Um, the Kung Fu Master, I think, is his nickname or something like that. I'm sorry, I can't remember. I'm not too familiar with him. This was my first time seeing him fight, but I would like to see him fight again if UFC comes back to Denver sooner rather than later. If he is endorsing the city of Denver, he's saying, I love training here. I want to start training here a lot more often. Then I love that. I respect that. I want to see him fight again. This fight may have been a little quote unquote boring. It's two guys fighting for real, for real. It's not boring to me. It's actually pretty awesome, even if it's more of a chess fight, chess match. So, yeah, Muslim Salikov gets the win in this co main event. And then finally, guys, our main event, we have Thug Rose Namajunas, Denver's very own, taking on Tracy Cortez. Thug Rose is ranked at number 6 in the women's flyweight division, and Tracy Cortez is ranked number 11 in the women's flyweight division. So here we go, the only ranked fight, and it's the main event of the night. Of course, this was supposed to be Thug Rose Namajunas against Macy Barber, who is number 4. So we were going to see a number 4 versus a number 6 in this women's flyweight division as the main event. But instead, we actually get a number 6 versus a number 11, which isn't as intriguing. I'm not going to lie. There's not a lot that can, it's a number 4 versus a number 6 is way better than a number 6 versus a number 11. Nonetheless, this was actually a really exciting main event, especially because the crowd was very happy to see their very own Rose Namajunas fighting in the city of Denver. So this fight actually went the distance here, but to me at least, it was crystal clear that Thug Rose Namajunas did what she needed to do to pick up the victory by decision here. She had a lot more takedowns, and this was a very well balanced fight. I will say UFC knows when a fight is going to be good and when a fight is main event worthy, and they go ahead and they knock it out of the park every time when it comes to main events. Every fight from a fan's perspective can't be perfect, right? But UFC is pretty dang good at making good main events, even if a co-main event was a little lackluster on this card. So this was a balanced fight, defensive, but also some good punches landing, some good kicks landing, kicks to the ribs, kicks to the shins. It was very well balanced with a little bit of ground game, a couple of takedowns. Thug Rose Namajunas was killing it with the takedowns, really keeping the crowd on their feet for the main event. These Denverites were rowdy. It was a great time, and Thug Rose gets the victory by decision to close out the show and leave everything on a good note. The only Coloradan to win their fight tonight happened in the main event. So yeah, like I said, it's a number 6 taking on a number 4. I mean, a number 6 taking on a number 11. So when the number 6 beats the number 11, what happens? There's not really much I don't think that Thug Rose can move up from her number 6 contender ranking. But if she were to beat Macy Barber, who did pull out of the fight and is the number 4 contender of this division, then she might have been able to bump up to number 4 or number 3 even. I don't know how the UFC rankings work exactly, but that's a pretty accurate reflection, in my opinion, of what would happen there. Nonetheless, guys, it looks like Thug Rose is going to have to take out one of the top 3 contenders. Maybe she will actually fight Macy Barber sooner than later and be able to crack the top 5. And, the cool thing about UFC is before every fight, they go ahead and they give you a hype package, a video that explains where both fighters are in their career and what they're trying to strive for, what a win will mean for them. And ultimately, Thug Rose Namajunas, Denver's very own, is striving for a UFC flyweight championship fight against Alexa Grasso. And now she sits at number 6. She's got a victory. Like I said, maybe 1 or 2 more victories against people in the top 5 of that division will grant her a championship fight. And maybe they'll do it in Denver. I don't know. I think Denver has a good MMA influence with a lot of fighters that didn't even fight tonight that are from Denver. And I think they can come back. And I would love to see the UFC come back to Denver. I would love to see a championship fight in the city of Denver. Right now, the women's bantamweight champion is Raquel Pennington, who is from Colorado Springs, Colorado. I think it'd be fantastic to see the UFC come back and have her main event. Neil Magny's a fantastic fighter from the city of Denver. I'd like to see him fight. I am actually a huge Neil Magny fan. He's won me a lot of money in the past. And yeah, this was very awesome, guys. Like I said, I normally don't watch UFC Fight Night. I'm just not that deep into the UFC game. I normally watch the pay-per-views, but nonetheless, man, getting to go there live and see my first UFC card in person was nothing short of a freaking spectacle. And I do encourage you guys, I'm sure a lot of wrestling fans are watching this right now because I cover a lot of wrestling, to get into UFC. Watch the UFC pay-per-views. I believe UFC 304 is on Saturday, July 26th, and I recommend watching that. There's going to be 2 championship fights, including the interim heavyweight champion of UFC and the welterweight champion of UFC. So I would recommend watching UFC 304. I'm very excited for it. Like I said, Saturday, July 27th. So coming up next weekend, I believe. But that's a summary and an analysis. Let me just butcher the clip here to close out the episode. That's a summary and analysis here of UFC Fight Night, Namajunas versus Cortez. Thanks for watching, guys. I can't wait to talk about more pro wrestling coming up soon. And then I can't wait to talk about UFC in like 2 weeks. All right, guys. Peace out.